Great. Welcome everybody to our national call tonight. I hope you've all recovered from your Earth Day week. I'm Jerry Friedman and I will be your facilitator for this call. We are really excited. As most of you know, last Thursday was a day to stop the money pipeline. And in order that we really are able to continue that effort, we have Emily Southard, who's going to be talking to you today and giving you a presentation on Stop the Money Pipeline. Emily is the campaign director for Stop the Money Pipeline and is a 2008 Obama alum, former Move Oner, and was the campaigns coordinator at Climate Truth for 5 years before joining 350.org as a campaign manager for the US. She spent the last 2 years at 350.org organizing the US climate strikes and Stop the Money Pipeline efforts as a coalition coordinator. Her background in the field of organizing and digital organizing and campaigning and the intersection of those two worlds. Her passion is in managing powerful teams to achieve the change we want to see in the world, while also achieving our own professional leadership development goals. So I'm going to turn it over to Emily in 1 second. Just to let you know, there's a Q&A box. There'll be time for Q&A at the end. Just hover over the bottom of your screen and you can put in the Q&A box. If you have, other little chats that you want, or introduce yourself or comments or information, put that in the chat box. But otherwise, use the Q&A. And right now, I'm going to turn it over to Emily to talk about the money pipeline. So to you, Emily.
Thank you, Jerry. I appreciate the introduction. So just for folks to know, I'm based in Denver, Colorado, which is occupied Ute, Shoshone, and Arapaho land. And I give that introduction because when we're talking about stopping the money pipeline, what we're really talking about is making sure that we're also protecting frontline communities who are on the front lines of real pipelines like Keystone, like Line 3. And many of those communities are indigenous and tribal nations whose occupied land we are on. And so in our coalition, we often do introductions that acknowledge that and that history. So thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be a part of your work and to give you some information about Stop the Money Pipeline. So as you can see here in the presentation on slide 1, this is all about Wall Street financing climate destruction and how we can stop it. So today what I'm going to go through are 3 main areas. One is letting you know what the Stop the Money Pipeline is and why it exists as a coalition effort. Tell you more about who are the targets of our campaign and our movement and why we've chosen them, or as my presentation says, way, I'll have to edit that. And then third, how you can support this effort to stop the money pipeline. So first of all, what is Stop the Money Pipeline? So it's a coalition effort. There are over 90 organizations that make it up. And together our goal is to hold the financial backers of climate chaos accountable. It was formed, well, just launched this January, and I'll go through the timeline a bit more. And why it came together is because there were all of these disparate efforts targeting Wall Street, but we realized that there was a need for coordination between the different financial campaigns targeting Wall Street's funding of climate chaos. And so we created this coalition as a way to make sure that we added more value and strength to the movement. And you can see here's just one of our shareable graphics that says, if we can stop the flow of money, then we can stop the flow of oil. And I can tell you a little bit more about how that's possible as we move on. But first, a little bit about the history of fossil fuel divestment, and also just divestment generally. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the South African divestment movement. That really started in the 1960s and began to pick up steam in the 1980s. And this was divestment from South Africa in protest of apartheid. And it's credited as one of the key components to actually dismantling apartheid. So a lot of inspiration was taken from that movement to launch the student divestment movement. So in 2013, 350.org actually launched the student divestment movement. And that's where we were asking endowments that universities had to make sure that they moved their money out of fossil fuel stocks and reinvested into other stocks that weren't destroying our climates and the futures of these students. Then in January of 2017, Mazaska Talks, and Mazaska is a Lakota word for money. It goes back to the roots. It used to be silver is what it meant. So Mazaska Talks launched, and this was an indigenous-led divestment effort that really became central to protecting frontline communities. And there was a big effort to make sure that Wells Fargo, for example, was divesting from Keystone XL. Then in September, and this should actually say 2019, so just this past fall, Bill McKibben wrote a New Yorker article entitled "Money is the Oxygen on Which the Fire of Global Warming Burns." This was actually one of the most shared New Yorker articles in the magazine's history. And I'm actually going to walk you through what it included. But it was one of the impetuses for this coalition, as were the previous moments. And then this January, the Stop the Money Pipeline Coalition launched. And I'll show you a video of that launch. It was launched via nonviolent direct action at a Chase Bank in Washington, D.C. And our focus for the coalition was to mobilize thousands of people to take action on April 23rd to occupy bank branches, Liberty Mutual branches, BlackRock headquarters to protest their financing of fossil fuels. And this is just, I wanted to share this graph. This shows a bit more about how much money has already been divested just from the student divestment movement. So over $14 trillion has actually been moved since the divestment movement launched. So, and it kind of gives you a breakdown of how many institutions, how many individuals have divested, and the breakdown here of where those have come from. So it's pretty impressive amount of money to move.
Hi,
Yep.
I'm Jane Fonda.
Let's see. This is the video that we produced with the Years Project that goes into a little bit about the campaign, as well as shows footage from our first action launching Stop the Money Pipeline in DC. So I'm going to play that for you now. And Jerry or Jen, just feel free to speak up if there's an issue with sound.
Hi, I'm Jane Fonda. This video is not for you, it's for someone else. That person is Jamie Dimon, CEO of Chase. But I need your help to get it to him, okay? And if we succeed, it could help stop the climate crisis. Right now, the oil, gas, and coal companies are laying waste to our planet. You'd think that these giant corporations would have all the money they need to continue full speed ahead, but no, they don't. They need money from banks to look for more coal, oil, and gas. And the big banks have been eager to comply. Chase is the worst. Since the Paris Climate Agreement, Chase has poured $196 billion into digging up more fossil fuels. That makes Chase just as responsible for the destruction of our planet as Exxon, Chevron, BP, and all the rest. So here's the message for Jamie Dimon. Jamie, move Chase's money out of coal, oil, and gas now. If you don't, we'll leave your bank. We'll cut up our Chase cards and find a better bank. So if you're not Jamie Dimon, share this video and tag Chase Bank. If enough of us do, it's going to get right to him. Stop the money pipeline.
So hopefully that played all right. But yeah, as you can see at our launch for the event, it was part of Fire Drill Fridays that Jane Fonda has been doing back when we could gather in person, along with Bill McKibben, Reverend Yearwood, Tara Hauska, one of the leaders, Indigenous leaders, helping stop Line 3. And there were some pictures there at the end of the actual occupation of the Chase Bake branch that we did there. And I'll go into more. There's actually more targets than Chase. That was just one of the launch actions that we did. So just going back to the article that Bill McKibben wrote, I wanna pull out some of the themes from it. But what it did is it reminded us where we're at in terms of our carbon levels. I know I'm probably speaking to the choir here, but I actually pulled the data today to just see where we were, which is in March, which is the latest data I could find, we had 414.5 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. A reminder that 350 is a safe level. Hurricane Dorian had just been churning over the Caribbean. One meteorologist said it was some of the worst destruction that's happened in history, in recorded history. And a report just came out that from NOAA that says, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Association, saying that there is a 75% chance that this year, 2020, will be the hottest year in recorded history. We also know, according to IPCC scientists, that if we are to meet the Paris Climate Accord, we're going to need to cut fossil fuel usage by 50% at least by 2030. So that gives us 10 years to do that. At the same time, we're seeing huge movements started by the youth, such as the Sunrise Movement working on a Green New Deal. We have Extinction Rebellion doing creative protests across the world. We have the Youth Climate Strikers, which have done incredible work that we've all been a part of. And we have incredibly pivotal elections coming up this year. But the problem is climate change is a timed test. We do have years, we don't have decades. And so how is it possible that we make the changes that we need in the time allotted? It's a scary prospect, which I think is one of the reasons this article was shared so much, is it spoke truth. And at the same time, the fossil fuel industry has actually 5 times as much carbon in reserves as what we can safely burn. So that's already out of the ground, and yet we're still digging. And amongst all of this, JPMorgan Chase has actually financed $196 billion to fossil fuels since we've known that we need to take this action to actually take more fossil fuels out of the ground. So that's some of the context as to why we're focusing on finance, is that we have an opportunity to make change really quickly. If that money stops flowing to fossil fuel companies, we know that they have to stop digging. And so that's our focus, because that change can actually happen really quickly. And we know that if some of our financial targets, which are leaders in their field, if they make a change, it cascades really quickly throughout the industry. So we have 5 main targets. The first one is Liberty Mutual, insurance companies. So the fossil fuel industry can't operate without insurance. And Liberty Mutual is one of the world's top insurers of and investors in fossil fuels. So we know that they are insuring Line 3. We know right now that the man camps that are being built along the KXL pipeline are going to need to be insured. And just for folks that don't know, man camps are the camps where the construction workers live, and that in those localities, there's an increase of missing and murdered Indigenous women as more men go into those communities. Liberty Mutual invests more than $8.9 billion in fossil fuel companies and utilities, including $1.5 billion in thermal coal. Yet, while fueling the climate crisis, Liberty Mutual is withdrawing coverage from and jacking up costs of insurance for longtime customers in areas at risk of climate impacts, like wildfire-affected areas in California. So they are a ripe target. Next, we have JP Morgan Chase. You just heard a bit about that work. And then actually, so an update is that in February, on its annual Investor Day, JP Morgan Chase actually published new restrictions on its lending and underwriting of coal and Arctic oil and gas, which are some of the first climate commitments from its assets manager arm. However, it's still not enough. They're still financing the actual companies. So even though they're like taking away some of their financing of some of fossil fuel projects, they still are by far and away the largest funder of fossil fuel projects. And even if they said that they were going to stop financing all fossil fuel projects, they are still financing the companies, fossil fuel companies, so they can just repurpose that money, that line of credit, and do their own financing. Next is BlackRock. BlackRock is the world's largest asset manager. It's also the world's largest shareholder and biggest investor in fossil fuels and deforestation. Overall, in the world, asset managers control 90 trillion US dollars of capital, and BlackRock has over $6.5 trillion under its management. So that's roughly equal to the world's top 20 pension funds combined. And so it's just massive amounts of money. So if BlackRock decided to stop investing in fossil fuels, you know, it would be a huge cascading effort. So next we have some of our divestment efforts. One are pension funds. State public pension funds in the US control more than $4 trillion in assets, and virtually all of them invest in fossil fuels. And there are some exciting developments that might be happening. For example, in New York, we're working on a campaign to make sure that in the next handful of years, they're transitioning all of their money out of fossil fuels. And as we know, I bet folks wish they had done that earlier because unfortunately for pensioners, that the oil markets have tanked. And so we'll be losing a lot of money. And we also showed a report that had the New York pension fund divested earlier, they could have saved tons and tons of money. And so we're calling for a scaled divestment that still maximizes the pensioners' investments, but yet takes money out of the fossil fuel industry. Next is university endowments. So university campaigns have successfully divested, as I showed earlier, trillions of dollars. And then recent victories include the University of California, the whole system, and Georgetown University have said, have committed to divestment. And there are over 100 university divestment campaigns across the country right now. On to the next slide. So all of this is to say, to simplify it, since there are a lot of targets under this big Stop the Money Pipeline umbrella, our basic demands are that banks, asset managers, insurance companies, and institutional investors stop funding, insuring, and investing in climate destruction. They need to stop funding fossil fuels and deforestation and start respecting human rights and indigenous sovereignty. So what's happened so far since this campaign? It just launched, as I said, in January, but word had gotten out. Folks knew that we were meeting in December, that this powerful group of frontline leaders and big green NGOs, as well as local groups from across the country, were joining together and joining their efforts to create Stop the Pipeline Coalition. And word got out and folks started getting nervous, although we can't take credit for all of this. But certainly some of the work that folks had done to lay the groundwork for this helped achieve some of these wins. So in December, Goldman Sachs ruled out Arctic drilling and some coal financing. And again, even though Goldman Sachs wasn't like a primary target, this just goes to show the kind of domino effect that can happen in the financial industry. So if some of the big dominoes fall, everyone adopts those same policies. Then we have Liberty Mutual, also announced a coal policy, changing some of its insurance, as well as Hartford Insurance, who announced a coal and tar sands policy. Then in January, BlackRock, as I mentioned earlier, divests from coal, and the CEO, Larry Fink, a promise to prioritize climate change in all of their business. We still want to nail them down on what that exactly looks like. And then in February, we had Chase released their new coal policy. And actually, that's the one I mentioned earlier. So also, we just had a little thing called Earth Day Live, which many of you tuned into. As I mentioned, you know, the original intent for this coalition was to come together for a mobilization on April 23rd, where we would be sitting in at bank branches, insurance branches, executive headquarters, and really taking up physical space and showing our disapproval and our protest in person. And then the pandemic happened, which you know, was a huge challenge for all of us in our personal lives and I'm sure professional lives as well. And it was a real question as to how we could move forward. But luckily, we've got some pretty innovative folks, especially our youth climate strike partners who we're in coalition with. And we decided to move our efforts online, that, you know, we had built momentum each month with these really clear wins, that we didn't want to give up momentum. Also, in the time of the pandemic that's leading to this economic crisis as well, Congress is doing these stimulus packages. And we knew that if we didn't respond, the wrong folks would be bailed out, the financial institutions, without any stipulations to the money. And the fossil fuel industry, you know, Trump's already called for an oil bailout, and that we had a responsibility to insert our voices and the voices of our bases in this moment. So that's why we created Earth Day Live. Thankfully, we had some amazing tech folks that volunteered their support to help. And if you tuned in, you might know that this all came together in 4 weeks, which is crazy. We had over 450 participants. So that means like the hosts, the people that were featured in the content. We had over 250 segments that we produced in this time. Luckily, you might have produced a segment. We crowdsourced that effort, which created 42 hours of content. And that was just for the one main channel. That doesn't include the 3 channels that we wound up having throughout the time over 3 days. Don't know why we had the great idea to do it over 3 days. It was a lot. And then over 500 organizations participated in this effort, which all resulted in 4 million views so far. 4 million people have tuned in so far. And actually that number is like quickly rising, because some of our content, like one piece of our content has already had, I think, 14 million views. So hopefully you enjoyed it and tuned in. And I'm actually gonna play you a piece of content that was played on Earth Day Live, which is from line 3, the front lines of line 3, that I just want to feature here. One second.
All right, so we're here in northern Minnesota, where Enbridge is threatening to build the tar sands pipeline called Line 3. We're looking at the matting that they're planning to bring into work sites to bulldoze the wetlands, to bulldoze the forest, our sacred places, our sacred being. Does this look essential to you, Governor Walz? Does this look essential to you? This isn't essential. This is destruction of life. This is a destruction of Mother Earth. We have to take a stand. We have to do something more. We have to be brave. We have to stand on front lines and expose this destruction of life, this destruction of who we are, of our identity as Anishinaabe people, of our identity as human beings. Oh, miigwech.
So that was Tara Hauska, who's leading, one of the Indigenous leaders fighting Line 3, and one of the steering committee members of Stop the Money Pipeline. And I share this, and I also share this tweet here, which I'll go into in a minute, just to remember that the reason, while we're talking about all this wonky stuff around finance, is because of these impacts, the impacts that are immediately happening in our communities, and then we know the impacts that are happening to communities around the world from climate change. And we want to make sure that we're centering those voices and telling those human stories. I also share this tweet. This came out today. I found it very disturbing. This is from Jason Kenney. He's the premier in Alberta, Canada. And he shared this tweet that shows pictures of the pipeline. It's actually Keystone. And it says, that's the Keystone pipeline crossing the Canada-US border from Saskatchewan into Montana. And from his perspective, it's a piece of good news when we need it most. I feel pretty differently, and I'm sure you do too. But this is to show also that in the middle of the pandemic and this crisis, construction is still moving ahead. And so that's another reason why we kept moving ahead with our plans, is we know that fossil fuel industry will take advantage of these moments when folks are distracted and looking elsewhere to advance their desires. So even though a barrel of oil was like negative amounts of money just last week, even though there's a pandemic happening, they're still moving forward with the Keystone pipeline. And it's actually being built right now, even though there are injunctions pending. And that's why we need to make sure that folks like Liberty Mutual not insure the man camps. Because not only will they be spreading violence by doing that, violence both on the land and to those communities, but they'll also have the risk of spreading the coronavirus. And we know that Indigenous nations are more affected than other communities. So how can you help? This fun part. So after all the gloom and doom, there are lots of ways to help. First of all, I do recommend just going to stopthemoneypipeline.com, signing up for the listserv, making sure that you're getting our email alerts. And you can sign our petition to tell Wall Street and Congress to choose people over polluters in this moment. I think I can make sure that Jerry has all the information and we send it out. Second is that you can move your money. If you have money in the banks like Chase, like Citibank, like Bank of America, that are some of the top investors in fossil fuels, you can use our tools that are on the Stop the Money Pipeline website to move your money to banks that don't invest in finance fossil fuels. And then third, this is pretty timely actually, Chase is going to be having its annual shareholder meeting in a couple of weeks. And their current board president is a guy named Lee Raymond. Lee Raymond was the CEO of ExxonMobil during the years where they made the decision to fund a climate denial campaign. So he's the guy that is responsible for basically the climate denial that we see that is pervasive now in the Western world. Because instead of changing their business, they decided to change public opinion and by launching a disinformation campaign. So he's the president of the board of Chase, which is one of the reasons why they're the biggest funder of fossil fuels. And there's going to be a vote coming up at the shareholder meeting about whether if he should continue to be the president of the board. And BlackRock, one of our other targets, is one of the biggest shareholders of Chase. And so if we convince BlackRock to come out against Lee Raymond as being the president of the board of Chase, then he probably won't be the president of the board of Chase. So we're asking folks to call BlackRock to demand that they vote against Lee Raymond being the president of the board of Chase Bank. And you can go to blackrocksbigproblem.com/call-BlackRock-now. We'll share these links because I know that's a long one. But what will happen is when you fill out the form, it'll automatically call you and your phone will ring. You'll get a phone call and it will connect you to the switchboard at BlackRock. So it'll plug you in right there and it'll give you a script and everything to say. There's lots to be done, but those are probably some of the 3 most immediate needs. And then I do want to just close out by sharing kind of our Stop the Money Pipeline anthem that the Peace Poets created. So I will play that for you now.
Stop the money pipeline. Their money and our values be our life. To life and in the future we are loyal when we stop the flow of money and we stop the flow. Stop the money pipeline. Their money and our values be our life. To life and in the future we are loyal when we stop the flow of money and we stop the flow. Stop the money pipeline. Their money and our values be our life. To life and in the future we are loyal when we stop the flow of money and we stop the flow. Stop the money pipeline.
So hopefully many of you saw that on Earth Day Live, but it also goes to show how even in these moments of social distancing, we can still create art together and shift culture and share stories in new and creative ways. Because not all of us, like yourselves, enjoy sitting on these webinars. And hopefully you did that, hopefully. But you know, some people gather their information through other ways. So we try and get creative and express ourselves to meet all types of audiences. So just a couple notes. If you want to follow us on Facebook, it's at Stop the Money Pipeline. Twitter is at Stop the Money Pipe. And then to join our email list, again, you can just go to stopthemoneypipeline.com. And you know, if you have any questions, just to say, I'm not the policy financial expert. I am more the expert in bringing people together around a united cause. So hopefully I can answer your questions, but if I can't, I'll be able to point you in the right direction, because that I can do. So my email address is emily.southard@350.org. And I'm more than happy to give you the information I know, but I'll also be humble about what I don't know, because financial stuff can get pretty wonky. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your time tonight, and hopefully you've gotten some information that's useful.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was awesome. And you gave us a lot of information, and we'll be sure to share all of those links publicly. We'll be able to get them on our website and get them out to people so they'll have access. And we always appreciate when somebody will give us some direct action that people can take. You know, here, you know, there's always a conversation of, well, okay, what do we do now? And you've given us some really concrete steps that we can take and a rationale for doing that. So thank you, and I thank you for your time. We have some questions, if you'd be willing to answer them. Marcia would like to know, what are the best banks, insurance, and credit card companies to do business with? And I guess following that, how do you really find out how they are invested? Because that information is pretty elusive.
Yes, that is a really great question. And I'm actually going to share a link in here in the chat that folks can go to check out, because some of that homework has been done for you, because it is hard to find the information. So some of the banks that we recommend, although just to be clear, we're not sponsored by any banks, is we've got a list of them, but we've got Beneficial State Bank, Amalgamated Bank, Aspiration Bank, community development credit unions are usually great. We have a list of them on that site. Also Black, Indigenous, and people of color owned banks like Blackout Coalition, Bank Black USA, Center for Indian County Development are some of what we recommend on our resources. And then as far as how you find that information, it is really difficult. So I think you have to kind of lean on the folks that have done the research for you, to be honest.
Great, thank you. Bill has a question. Have we proven to our satisfaction that divestment has measurably resulted, excuse me, in a reduced greenhouse gas consumption, or as a proxy, stock prices? By what, do you know the percentage by which these numbers have declined?
I don't know the percentage, but what I can tell you is that, oh gosh, I want to say, I'm going to forget the exact person now. It's not coming to me, but it is someone like Jamie Dimon, who's the head of Chase. Might not be him. I'm having a moment, but said recently on earlier in this year to investors that divestment was one of the greatest threats. Actually, oh, you know what it was? It was, I think, the CEO of Exxon that said it, like, divestment was one of the biggest threats to fossil fuel expansion. So I can try and find that exact article that cites that, but that is a huge indicator. And when we're talking about $14 trillion that's already been moved, that's quite a bit when you're thinking that. BlackRock, for example, has $6.3 trillion of assets that they manage. So we have indicators that show that we're making movement, and that is also seen as, the prices have gone down. Less so, I know that, like, the pandemic is, and some of the Saudi Arabia, Russia tensions were creating the low cost in oil, but you'll also see, I think, Kramer from CNBC saying before oil prices tanked that, like, the movement is coming together against fossil fuels. You don't want to invest in it. It's time to get out of fossil fuels. You're seeing, like, key financial analysts saying, like, the time has come and gone. And then there was an article that came out today that did an analysis. I don't have the sources exactly, but I can find them for you. That said, the biggest threat to fossil fuels, especially oil right now, is the fact that no one's going to touch it anymore. Like, even though they've hit a rock bottom, like, no one, because of this work, no one wants to go back to it and take that risk. So some of that's anecdotal, but also analytical from some of financial experts.
Excellent. Let's get to a couple more questions here. One question that I have is, has there been any research done into suggestions for insurance companies? You just gave us some suggestions for banks, but what about better options for insurance companies?
Also a great question. I will share another link in the chat. So Insure Our Future is one of the, it's funny, we're a coalition of coalitions. Insure Our Future is one of the coalitions and campaigns that is a part of Stop the Money Pipeline. And mostly what they have is ways to find out if your insurance company has investments in fossil fuels. So you can look that up. My computer is being slow, but once that link comes up for me, I will share it. There you go.
And on the same note, credit card companies. How do we learn about our credit card companies and if they're, you know, is there green options for credit cards?
Yeah, so I think that goes, it's similar with the banks. So, you know, it's credit unions, amalgamated bank, and all those others that I had mentioned previously.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's see, let's get back to another question here. How about, have there been any efforts to divest the federal employees thrift savings plan from fossil fuels or to offer a fossil fuel free fund within the TSP? Are you familiar?
I'm not the person to ask, but I can, but there is a group, let me just pull it up. Oh, it doesn't look like I'm in it anymore. But let me pull up on Stop the Money Pipeline, the resource for that.
Great.
It's a good test of if our resources are pertinent. So far we're so good, but it'll just take me a minute to pull that up.
Excellent. And then what about, are any of the pension funds of faith-based organizations targets of the Stop the Money campaign?
Yeah, so we actually have quite a few faith partners that are working in coalition with us to do shareholder advocacy, to make sure that if they are, for example, one of Chase's shareholders, that they're calling on Lee Raymond as well to not be the president of the board, as well as looking at divesting their own holdings that they have out of fossil fuels. So both, yes. And I'm gonna say, I'm just on the state pension fund piece, there are campaigns that are active in Alaska, California, Colorado, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New Jersey, New York, and Washington. And there are links to many of those if you scroll down to pension funds on this page, where you can join and learn more about those specific pension fund campaigns.
And Emily, if you could make sure that you send those chats to all panelists and participants or attendees so that they're getting them too, that would be great. I can always cut and paste them in. And also to remind everybody, I will be sending out a recording of the call tomorrow. So you will receive the recording, and we'll make sure that we highlight all of these different links that Emily has provided for us this evening. How can one find out what their bank invests in? Do you have any suggestions?
It can be tricky. Yeah, so I personally don't, to be honest. So what we do have is, we know, I mean, I think you'd have to go look at your different funds. I don't have a good answer for you, but I could connect you with folks that are experts on different banks and what they know. You know, they have like the Bloomberg terminals, because it's changing so frequently, right? So they're like, for example, Rainforest Action Network actually owns the Bloomberg terminal, and they have financial analysts that are tracking all of these investments. But it's very difficult to find out unless you have a guaranteed fund. However, I do recommend a report by Rainforest Action Network that I can also share with you, that kind of gives an analysis of some of the biggest funders of fossil fuels. And they release this report in coalition with us and tons of other folks each year. So it's something to track if you want to see the report over time. So I will send that to you as well.
Excellent. Are there places where we can learn how much federal subsidies to the fossil fuel companies have been, how much they've been receiving in federal subsidies?
A lot. Yeah, so that's not our focus for the campaign. So
right.
I don't have an answer, but we are tracking it, and sorry, I have a plane in the background. We are tracking it pretty closely as far as it comes to the stimulus packages, to kind of understand, will there be an oil bailout? How can we make sure that we're protesting against that so that it doesn't happen? But yeah, that's not a historical focus of our work.
Understandable.
It's a huge problem.
Yes.
It's another money pipeline.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a substantial money pipeline for sure. Let's see here. And don't forget, you can always put your questions to us in the Q&A box here if you have any questions to ask Emily. Are you also against biomass investments when you're looking at fossil fuel industry?
Yes. So I think I know where that question is coming from. But yeah, so there was actually a documentary that was done by Michael Moore that I can even point you to 350's statement on it. But generally we are not, as far as a coalition is concerned, I don't think we've taken a position. I would say generally speaking, we've seen that biomass pollutes as much as fossil fuels. And so it's not a part of the solution. But there was a documentary that recently made claims that were outdated about the position of both Bill McKibben and 350.org on that subject.
Yes, the information in that documentary was quite out of date. And there's been some really great articles coming out to counter it. Yeah. Let's see here. How about, this is very exciting. Are there ways you can use the drop in fossil fuel prices to help move divestment forward?
Yeah, definitely. I think so, because I think, for years we've been saying that it's a bad investment. And that, the pension fund managers and comptrollers are really gambling with people's retirement funds, because we know that a moment like this, we've been warning for years that it would be coming and that it was only a matter of time. And so we actually did an analysis in New York around how much money pensioners lost because of the fact that they didn't divest before this moment. And so, I think the challenges now is that folks don't want to pull their money out. It just hit rock bottom. And so how do we make sure that they're pulling their money out in a managed way? Most of the legislation that's coming is talking about 5-year horizons or 10-year horizons. But the important thing is that, their fund managers should be looking at when is if it goes up at all, pull it out right away because it's going to go back down.
Right. Let's see here. What is the best way to prevent the stimulus package from going to the wrong places and getting dedicated to the green economy as much as possible? 2 birds, 1 stone, or as I like to say, 2 birds, 1 scone.
Could you repeat the question? I missed the beginning. I just pulled up our response to the biomass.
What is the best way to prevent the stimulus package from going to the wrong places and to make sure that it's dedicated to the green economy as much as possible?
Yeah. Well, I don't think there is any one way. First, it's really handy to have some policy experts in the mix. So we do have a policy working group made up of policy experts from a handful of organizations that are closely monitoring what's happening on the Hill and trying to see, what stipulations are banks getting. Is there an opportunity to say, oh, a bank shouldn't get this money unless they, none of the money should go to fossil fuel investment. And so we're just looking at the little details and planting those seeds that set the stage for a Green New Deal, as opposed to dig us deeper into this hole. So there isn't one way more than just combing through pages and pages of policy, making sure that we're educating our politicians. So, when we see something that comes up and might be really wonky and a senator might not understand why it's important or not, we actually go in and do briefings for the Hill. And we actually did one right before Earth Day Live, where we briefed some senators and Congress people on the state of Earth Day.
All right, how about, I think we all just have to be kind of watchdogs, right? We all need to be paying attention to where the stimulus package funds are going, and we all need to be making sure that our voices are really out there and heard, that we're calling our members of Congress and letting them know what we want done with this money.
Yeah. And I think it's also our responsibility, to like get out of the policy wonk world, but then give people, like, spell it out really clearly. Like, here's a call script, here's what you can do to say, so that we know that what our values are actually being translated into these like more wonky policy pieces. So as an organizer, that's where a lot of my work lives, more in that space than in the wonk, as you might be able to tell.
Right. Well, I'm right there with you. I think we live in similar spaces. Another question here. We got a couple more, I think, that we can get to before we run out of time. How will you respond if the fossil fuel companies argue that the U.S. economy will end up in a deep depression if they're not funded and supported? And they will say that they're a pillar of our economy, and without them, that we're going to fail. And so, what's the response there?
Yeah, of course. Well, we know they're going to say that. So that's
we're hearing.
Yeah, that's, we're hearing that, as we've seen, industries line up for their paycheck in moments of crises. But then at the same time, you hear talking heads saying, "Oh, it's horrible that people are asking for unemployment." Yet, corporate bailouts, there's a long line for them. So yeah, a couple things. One is that we know that the fossil fuel industry doesn't employ as many people as a green and clean economy could. There are staff on that around a Green New Deal. Especially, I'm from the state of West Virginia. So, I grew up surrounded by coal communities and have some insight into how those communities are being really hard hit and how some of the just transition work can be difficult for those communities. But we also know that there's a truth that coal isn't putting that many people to work. It's far less than solar and wind. And that's just a truth, and that we need to work with those communities to transition them to good paying union, clean and renewable energy jobs. So additionally, I think another point that is important to make is that, the pandemic gives us kind of an insight into what's going to happen on climate change down the road. We're going to have shock after shock after shock after shock to our economic system as these climate disasters pile up on one another. And we need an economy that is resilient and adjusts for that and accounts for that transition that we're going to need to a renewable energy economy. So in this moment where we do have an opportunity to reevaluate and rebuild, let's make sure that we're investing in the future and creating a system that is resilient, as opposed to propping up the old and broken.
Amen to that. One last quick question here is, how many people have made it? Is there a number of people who have made a commitment to this process of changing banks, or is there a timeline to when this is happening? Is it now?
Yeah, now.
Possible?
Always. So there isn't like one big moment yet that we're going to say we have X many people that have pledged, but that's something that we're actually considering. So now that we've gone through Earth Day Live, we're at a moment where we can slow down, breathe a little, and reevaluate what might make sense. And that's one of the tactics that we're considering is, do we want to drive up that number and show how many pledges we have and for what amount of money would that be effective to moving our targets? So that's something that we're considering. So if you do move your money now, please share that story with us. I think there's an email on the site to do it, to make sure that we can elevate it. We could maybe train you up to do some media pitch op-eds, letters to the editor, that sort of work, because we don't want to do it in a vacuum, but share the stories so that other people are inspired and our targets know what's happening.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was wonderful, and certainly a lot of information. And I'm glad you shared so many links with us and so many action items that we can start working on. And I really appreciate that. And I appreciate spending the time with us. I know how tired you must be after spending the build up to Earth Day Live, and what an incredible event it was. And the Stop the Money Pipeline Day was amazing, as were the other 2 days. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for being with us tonight. To all of our participants, thank you for joining us. It's been great having you all here for a short hour, and I hope that you will consider joining us either on Wednesday at 1 o'clock or Friday at 3 o'clock for our community conversation, where we just get together and have conversations about some of these issues, and do so in small groups where you can really kind of dive into some conversation and everybody can be heard. So we're doing that. And we also have our Climate Tea and Talks, which are on the second Tuesday of the month. And just as a sneak preview to everybody, Giving Tuesday this year is generally on the Tuesday after Thanksgiving, but due to the pandemic and the financial situation, it has been moved this year to May 5th. And we are going to be also asking you to, if you can, make some contribution to Elders Climate Action and to others who are hurting in this pandemic. So we're looking for your support for Elders Climate Action as we're working hard through this. We're not stopping. We can still be virtual. We don't have to wear masks to meet with you all. And we still have to do the work. We can't sit and wait until this is over to start talking about climate change again. So hopefully you can support us, and hopefully you can support your own community. And there's plenty of organizations that certainly need your help in your community. So thank you all, and good night, and have a good evening.
Thank you for having me. It was a true pleasure.
Thank you.